Good afternoon. Hi, it's Diane Mathewitz and Paul McLennan here in the studios of WRFG in Atlanta, Georgia, in Little Five Points. And we are about to start the Labor Forum, and we're excited to be here today. We have some great guests, and we're going to have some good conversation. I'm a retired auto worker, and Paul worked for many, many years for MARTA and is a retired ATU member. And the opinions that are expressed on this program are ours, and they may not necessarily be those of the board of directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG. But the Labor Forum is a long-running show that goes to the mission of this station. For you who listen, you know that we're unlike any other radio station in the metro Atlanta area. One, we're all volunteers, so we're not some glossy, airbrushed anchors. We are people from the community, and we are on this radio and station because we believe in its mission, which is that this station is for those that are kept off largely of the commercial media, and we speak directly to the experiences and issues and solutions that workers, oppressed people, and of course we play the music of all the communities, what we call roots or heritage music. And so we are often the place where new musicians, new singers, new bands are able to get their foot into exposure to a wider audience. We appreciate you, and we thank you very much for tuning in to the Labor Forum and to tuning into all the other programs that are here on WRFG. So today we're going to start off with our opening segment, which is both labor headlines and this week in labor history. We then will have a call from Vermont, from the member of the UE 203, which is in Burlington, Vermont, a union that organized against Klan intimidation. And then we're going to follow that up at 4:30 with a conversation with Abdul Rashid Mann here at WRFG and Barbara Joy. And we're going to be talking about the legacy and the contributions of Cliff Kuhn, who died several days ago. And that should be both informative and humorous, because Cliff was a very multi-talented person with a lot of humanity to him. So let's start. So, labor headlines on November 16th, 2015. I am deviating today from the news I would normally be reporting on in more detail. And that news would have been a general strike in Greece on the day that still more social service cuts and tax increases were put in place to fulfill the austerity demands of the bailout by the bankers and bosses. Or I would have reported on a strike for union recognition at a Boston IKEA store, or the ongoing, right now it's happening, occupation of a Minneapolis police precinct after a young black man was shot in the head while handcuffed, or the privatization vote taken by the MARTA board to turn paratransit services over to a for-profit company despite public opposition. Did any of these events become less important, especially since they signify the organized response of workers, youth, pensioners, and people of color to a system which denies human rights to all in the pursuit of profit and the maintenance of power? No, but what compels a change today in this segment is the aftermath of the November 13-14 attacks in Paris, which killed at least 129 people and injured hundreds more. Humanity naturally grieves. But the nonstop TV pictures, the 24-hour-a-day coverage, the huge frontline headlines, all building feelings of sorrow, shock, and outrage, coordinated by global media conglomerates, must be examined. On the internet, many are asking, why was there no similar coverage when just the day before the mass death in Paris, bombs went off in Beirut, often called, ironically enough, the Paris of the Middle East, killing 44 and injuring 240. And shortly before that, 224 passengers on a Russian airliner, or 102 killed in Ankara, Turkey, at a peace rally. And then earlier this year, 147 students in Kenya shot down at their school. And before that, 2,000 in Nigeria. All of these incidents allegedly at the hands of right-wing extremists. So why today am I changing? It is the military and political responses by the leaders of the US, France, NATO, and others, their use of this attack in a Western capital that indicate a dangerous escalation of war, racist and demagogic rhetoric, increased militarization of police, and the diversion of huge sums of money to pay for weapons, border fences, and other methods of promoting division and fear. We need to talk about what has created the conditions that lead to these attacks, and more critically, who and what is ultimately responsible for them. The ongoing US-NATO wars across Western Asia and Northern Africa have destroyed that region's stable states and societies, killed millions of people, and uprooted tens of millions from their homes. The misery and destruction visited upon Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Yugoslavia, Ukraine, and others by constant warfare has been accompanied by the deliberate stirring up of religious and national antagonisms. A refugee crisis of unprecedented numbers is occurring around the globe as people are fleeing war and poverty. So what does all this mean for working people here in the US? We are facing an even greater threat of war, endless war, initiated and escalated by this government. White supremacists will attempt to promote racism, Islamophobia, and hatred of, quote, foreigners, unquote. We see that already in the statements of political candidates for president, the statements of governors, the statements here in Georgia of elected officials. The Black Lives Matter movement and all those fighting police terror, mass incarceration, state surveillance, and repression of dissent will be subjected to more pushback. Workers and the poor will be asked to sacrifice wages and benefits, housing, healthcare, education, a clean environment, civil and human rights, for security, for the welfare of the state. It is more important than ever that working class people define their own interests, recognize the need for solidarity, and take action to achieve it. We here at the Labor Forum will work hard to keep our eyes on the prize, and that prize is the end of war, exploitation, and oppression for all the world's people. And those are my commentary on today's headlines. We're going to move right away to Paul, who again has another extraordinary life to tell us about.
Thanks, Diane. On November 15th, 1998, in Guinea, West Africa, Kwame Ture died at the age of 57 after a long battle with prostate cancer that he fought as fearlessly as he did the systems of white supremacy and capitalism. Ture was a Trinidadian American revolutionary active in the 1960s Black Freedom Movement and later the global Pan-African movement. Kwame Ture was born Stokely Carmichael on June 29, 1941, in Port of Spain, Trinidad. He immigrated to the United States in 1952 with his family and settled in New York. His mother, Mabel Carmichael, was a stewardess for a steamship line. His father, Adolphus, was a carpenter who also worked as a taxi driver. After graduating high school in 1960, he attended Howard University in Washington, D.C., and became very involved in the Freedom Rides, sit-ins, and other demonstrations to challenge apartheid segregation. He worked with the Congress of Racial Equality and the Nonviolent Action Group. In 1961, he participated in the Freedom Rides, organized by CORE to desegregate the bus station restaurants along U.S. Route 40 between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. He was frequently arrested and spent time in jail, including 49 days at the Parchman State Prison Farm in Mississippi.
Wow.
In 1964, he became a full-time field organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and worked on the Greenwood Voting Rights Project under Bob Moses. Throughout Freedom Summer, he worked with grassroots African American activists, including Fannie Lou Hamer, whom Carmichael named as one of his personal heroes. He appointed several women to posts as project directors during his tenure as chairman of SNCC. By the latter half of the 1960s, more women were in charge of SNCC projects than during the first half. He was elected SNCC's national chairman in June 1966, replacing John Lewis. While in Greenville, Mississippi, he, along with his comrade Willie Ricks, created the cry "Black Power," which became the most popular slogan of the Black Freedom Movement. Defining its meaning, he said, "Black folks need to begin openly and had the right and the duty to define for ourselves in our own terms our real circumstances, possibilities, and interests relative to white America, to determine what the relationship was." During his time with SNCC, he helped build bridges between the Black freedom struggle and other social movements. He was especially supportive of indigenous people's struggles in this country. Recognizing commonalities between Southern Black sharecroppers and Mexican fieldworkers, he and others from SNCC met with the National Farm Workers Organizing Committee. He also forged ties with the Puerto Rican independence movement and the New Mexico land grant struggle of La Raza in the mid-60s. He supported the Palestinian struggle against the Israeli occupation, and in keeping with its internationalist perspective, SNCC conducted actions against the military draft in the Vietnam War under his leadership. In 1967, Touré took a transformative journey, traveling outside the United States to visit with revolutionary leaders in Cuba, North Vietnam, China, and Guinea. Upon his return to the U.S., he left SNCC and became Prime Minister of the Black Panther Party. In 1969, he quit the Black Panthers and left the U.S. to take up permanent residence in Guinea, where he dedicated his life to the cause of Pan-African unity. He changed his name to Kwame Ture to honor Kwame Nkrumah, who led Ghana to independence from Britain, and Sekou Touré, who was president of Guinea and his mentor. For more than 30 years, Touré led the All-African People's Revolutionary Party and devoted the rest of his life to Pan-Africanism, a movement to uproot the inequities of white supremacy for people of African descent and to develop an economic and cultural coalition among the African diaspora. Pan-Africanism is based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social, and political progress. Touré stressed the need for serious study. Since the struggle was about political consciousness in the community, he said, our first responsibility was to educate ourselves seriously. Above all, he believed in the enduring need for a clear, disciplined, coherent, democratic, mass-based, grassroots organization. In his own words, his message was to never give up, question everything, challenge every authority, always seek information, and organize, 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 and never ever despair. Trust yourself, trust the people, never settle for less, never give up. Organize, organize, organize. History is full of surprises, especially for exploiters. Organize, organize, organize. Stand ready for revolution.
Thank you. That's a great message for us here today after, again, the kind of really overwhelming number of cases that we're seeing of people being just so incredibly harmed by this system. We're going to take a short break, and our guest is on the phone. We're excited to talk to Elizabeth. And so who we're going to be speaking with is Elizabeth Nikazmerad from Burlington, Vermont. Stay tuned. And that's an important message. We do want to, again, thank everyone who contributed during our pledge drive. But please do fulfill your pledge as soon as you can. So Elizabeth, welcome, welcome, welcome to the airwaves of WRFG.
Thank you.
So I have to say, this is exciting. Oftentimes we think about the fight against the Ku Klux Klan and racist organizations like them. Certainly here in the South, we can talk about so many examples of people opposing their intimidation and terror. But hey, you're in Burlington, Vermont. Can you tell our listeners what happened?
So, basically what happened is that a couple weeks ago at this point, two women of color, one of whom was activist for Black Lives Matter, received KKK recruitment flyers on their door. So this was something that was specifically targeted, someone who found out where they had lived, and flyers them basically. It was brought attention, the incident was brought attention to the local activist community, and press conferences were had, and members of my local basically got together and were trying to figure out how to have a organized militant response to this.
I forgot to mention, you should first say what union you're in and where all of you work. I apologize.
Yeah, no worries. I work at Market, and our local is UE Local 203.
Okay, so all right, so the members of UE Local 203, and again, for people who need to learn their labor history, this is one of the most democratic, forward-thinking, progressive unions. And in fact, we reported just a couple of weeks ago after the UE convention that you all had passed a resolution in support of BDS, which is boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israeli occupation of Palestine. So this is a union that we all want to know more about. So how is it that your members, what conclusion did they come to? What did you all do?
So basically, we had decided that it was important to have a very, very strong fight back, basically, against this racist, fascist group. And our response was that we were going to put together a workers' defense guard. And that was going to be including members of our local, members of the community that were basically going to fight back against the KKK or anyone else that would work underneath their banner, basically.
So I read the account, and I read a little bit about the march that you had and the chants that you had, and also the statement you put out. Could you talk a little bit more about how it is you explained to the community why it was so important to have a visible opposition by a union and by workers?
Mm-hmm. I think that there's a long history of the labor movement of being involved in progressive campaigns, and I think that a lot of times there's a lot of strength within workers and within the working class. So I think that that was why it was important, and it was just sorry.
I know, to gather your thoughts. I want to, it is, and we talk about this on this program all the time, don't we, Paul? About how the issue of racism is the big dividing factor in so many cases that weakens the ability of workers to fight effectively against not just what's on the job, low wages or, repressive boss or whatever, but also in their community, that when the element of racism, and I just want to ask you about the demographics of Burlington, because I have to say, when I read that there was Ku Klux Klan literature in Burlington, Vermont, I thought, well, wow, what are they doing there? Or did anybody ever know there was active Klan there before?
I believe that there was active Klan membership in Vermont, but there wasn't any knowledge of people specifically in Burlington.
So this really was a response to the Black Lives Matter movement then?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so talk a little bit more about how your union membership, but also the community, looked at both the march that you had and the other statements that were made by elected officials, etc., but more importantly, how they are responding to the idea that there'd actually be a defense guard, that if these two women in particular, but the black community as a whole, actually felt physical threats or other threats.
Mm-hmm. So we had a very positive response from people in the community. One of the people who had been targeted actually marched with us when we went down. I think that overall the response was very positive, and I think that, it was something that was missing a little bit from the responses that had been given before to what had happened. There had been talk of having press conferences and speak outs, and it was just important to recognize that stuff like that a lot of times just draws attention to the issues, and also sometimes gives people the KKK more recruiting power. So it was important to have it was really nice to have a very positive response.
So Elizabeth, okay, so I'm going to guess that there hasn't been any more leaflets left at anybody else's doors since?
No. But this was actually not the first time we realized in the midst of this. Several months ago, I think, at that point, leaflets had been distributed in a housing community specifically for where a large number of refugees resided as well. And they were kind of just too scared to come forward. And I think a lot of that just shows the power that the KKK and other hate groups have when they allow people to be isolated. They force isolation and fear.
Yeah, I have to do, it should come as no surprise to you that the Klan here in Georgia has also seized upon the immigration issue as a rallying point, using the whole kind of myth and lie, actually, about how immigrants are stealing these good-paying jobs from people, and also just all the associated xenophobia and kind of right-wing rhetoric around it. So yes, I totally recognize that many times those communities which are so under siege by law and by fears of being deported and all the rest would not have necessarily come forward. So it's great that you all took that step. I want to applaud you all so much for doing that. So let me ask a little bit then about just union organizing in Burlington, Vermont. I know when I read the press release or something that there were other UE locals besides your own that participated in the march. Where are your unions in Burlington, Vermont? What kind of jobs and workplaces?
So it's kind of a broad range of workplaces. The people that came from people who work at UVM, and also, which is the college in Burlington, and also people who came in from Montpelier, which is the capital of Vermont. So, and they worked at Hunger Mountain, which is another food cooperative.
I have to say, when I told Paul that this UE local was at a food co-op, his eyebrows went up. And so talk to us about how long the food co-op has had a unionized workforce.
Oh my gosh, a fairly long time, longer than I've actually worked there. I think about maybe 8 or 9 years now, probably a little longer than that.
Well, we have to say that this was a first for us. We didn't know about unions at food co-ops. Mm-hmm. Is this common in Vermont?
I think that, I don't know if I would necessarily say common, but there are 2 food co-ops that are unionized under UE. I know that there is another in Vermont that is not organized under our union. I believe they might be, I can't remember. But there's also a third co-op in Pittsburgh that were recently organized under UE.
I saw that on your website. Yeah. I want to just say we have several food co-ops here in Atlanta. And So that's just a word to the wise. It's something that can be done. I want to thank you. So in this last minute of our segment here, is there anything that you would like to, to say to our listeners about this experience? I'm assuming, I could be wrong, that this was your first experience in actually meeting a KKK threat in your town.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk just as maybe if you have a comment about what that meant to you to both find out that they were present and also the way you were able to respond to it?
I think, and this is going to stray a little bit from that, but I once heard it described as the police on the streets are equivalent to the bosses and the managers in our store. And I think that it's really important as union members, as workers, to recognize that our fight isn't just insular, and it isn't just in the workplace, but it has to be in the community as well. And that, we have to fight for our communities just as hard as we would to enforce our the contracts. And we can't expect our bosses or our police or any other paternalistic figure to do that for us. We have to do that ourselves.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Maybe if you want, you could give your website, because I'm sure there are some folks out there that are curious about how it is that a food co-op has a contract and what your contract provisions are, and also about the activities that you've done, because I saw on your website you had lots of good pictures. So how would people reach out to you?
So we do not have a website. We
It was
have
a Facebook
page. And that is UE Local 203.
On Facebook.
And our nationals website is www.ueunion.org. So if you want to see some of the really, really amazing stuff that our union has been doing across the country, I would go there.
Thank you so much for taking the time to call us today. And good luck. We'll hope to hear from you again soon. So, folks, we were just on the phone with Elizabeth Nikazmerad, who's calling in from Burlington, Vermont, and member of UE Local 203. We're going to take a brief message, and then we're going to have our conversation about labor historian and WRFG person and supporter and developer Cliff Kuhn. Stay tuned.